is Rick, and this is your seat at the table. Back when I was in my early 20s, my best friend back from school back in the day, that's what we used to go, what's up, dude. Yeah, that was a thing back then. I'm just saying it was the 80s. What are you going to do? This is Rouge of the Borderlands, Iron Crown Enterprises fantasy adventure playing module from board setting in J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth. Alright, playable with Burp and or Rollmaster, based on The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, etc. And this was produced in 1990. First U.S. printing, January 1990. First print. Alright, so much of my stuff, first print. And this covers an area of Western Arnor that I've always found very interesting. And I have actually run a number of small campaigns and sessions and stuff in this neck of the woods, in part because it's far enough away from most of the hot spots of the big world, if you will. And it's considered a backwater, so if Arthedain's still in full swing, it's a great frontier area for first level characters to get their taste, for players to get a flavor of the Middle-earth role-playing, and yet still have that fantasy sword and sorcery balance to it that a lot of people, experienced players, are used to having. It's setting with the backdrop of the Blue Mountains, so you've still got enclaves of Dwarves, you've got the Great Havens where the Elves live in considerable concentration, just far enough away from where the Shire is, depending what time period you choose. So you have an influx of some hobbits, an explanation of having all the major races available. It's just far enough away from Angmar and the Misty Mountains to not be totally plagued by goblins and orcs and trolls and what have you, but still have a few selection of them. The Blue Mountains are not known to have any large goblinoid settlements in them, and that's probably because of the predominant Dwarven and Elvish presence in that western vicinity. They wouldn't tolerate it. They just wouldn't. But small bands operating on raiding standards or trying to move into the region are doable, just like rogue trolls. Trolls can be anywhere as the conditions are suitable for them in small numbers. So it makes for a great, like I said, opening area. Gives us the introduction, the guidelines. West of the land of Arthedain lies a great expanse of territory known as the Numeriador, or the empty western lands. This open and rugged terrain is wrinkled by a series of rolling foothills that rise up out of the river Loon and become the mighty arid Loon, the Blue Mountains. The peaks serve as a barrier between the lands of the Loon River Valley and the Elven Kingdom of Linden to the west. Within the range roots lie the ruins of the ancient dwarven cities of Norgrove and Belgros. The mountains hold many wonders and dangers for those who wish to brave their heights and depths. The Randor is also forgotten in the books of men and elves, which describes it merely as wildlands. But the foothills of the arid Loon are not so much wild as they're uncluttered by the roads, hedgerows, stone walls, and farmsteads that dot the countryside of more civilized regions. Foothills slopes support a myriad of plant life and animal life, some of which are only found in the area. Great expanses of forest, yawning valleys, particular cascades of water, etc. On a different note, I did a video some time back, could be years now. It's in here on the YouTube thing someplace, where I talked about the ups and downs, the downfall of Arnor, and in my opinion, where things went wrong and why. There's also a section I talk about Aragorn's people. How is it that the range of the north survived in any sizable population to still be viable? In order for Aragorn's descendants to have had a viable breeding population, and I know that's being crude, but you have to have an X amount of people. And it's accepted in modern circles today to be roughly about 5,000. You need to have about 5,000 to have a healthy, breedable population of human beings. So there would have to be in the thousands. The Dunedain of Arthedain, or Arnor, or the north, would still have to be in significant numbers. And one of the places where would they have hidden if they purposely chose to keep their numbers low and to keep to themselves because they're not ready to, follow the path of the king? How would they go about doing it? And I've always had the opinion that this neck of the woods is an excellent ground for them to have survived and survived in modest comfort. They're Dunedain, by the way. They're not hillmen. So they're going to have a certain life standard or standard of living they won't accept below that standard, and otherwise they would have migrated away. And the occasional influx of fresh Dunedain blood from other locations, specifically Gondor, would help maintain that population, and it would justify the numbers of rangers that are reported to operate in the north. We know from the novels that from J.R.R. Tolkien's work that there were 30 that accompanied Aragorn as the Grey Company on his ride to Gondor and his return towards pursuing the kingship. And so that suggested, they also implied after the scouring of the Shire, it was suggested that the majority of the Rangers had rode north or rode south, and in doing so had left the borders of the Shire and free land exposed for the first time in centuries, and so much so that the locals noticed. They really noticed the difference, and that tells me that, like I said, there had to be a reasonably sizable population, and this area here in western Arthedain, to the areas of the northwest of the Shire proper, would be a good location. The weather's not totally inclement. There's enough infrastructure remaining from what's left of Arthedain to be maintained and to allow for certain types of what have you, and they could discreetly engage and trade with the halflings and the dwarves. So, just in my opinion, right, which makes this a viable area. Let's see, so we got the arid loam, the blue mountains, the foothills, the climate, the flora and fauna, herbs and poisons that can be found, the reptiles, herbivores, birds and flying creatures, the predators, domestic animals, insects, and the monsters. So we talk about trolls. Some creatures dwelling in Numeriador are not part of the balance of nature, but twisted perversions of darkness. They are rare and more often found in tales used to frighten youngsters than in the field or meadows surrounding a village or hamlet. Yes, trolls, undead, and other corruptions do lurk in forgotten and unfrequented folds of the land. The following is a list of monsters that may be encountered: trolls, fell beasts, evil Hurons, and trees, and the undead. But there's no goblins, no orcs. All right. And the ones that talk about the trolls, these are just generally wild trolls. They're not under control of somebody. So, peoples and cultures, you've got a diverse culture. Back to my original comment about this being an excellent area for the survivors of the Arnorian Dunedain to thrive. Perhaps not prosper like they could have, but thrive is in this neck of the woods because you have other supporting cultures that they can work with. And the rivermen are some, of course, the Dunedain, the Dwarves, the Blue Mountains, and the Elves, and a few other races, which would include the Hobbits. Then we got politics and power, the Kingdom of Arthedain, Lindon and the Elves, the Dwarves. Remember, most of the settings for these adventures are roughly 3rd Age, 1640. So the fall of Arthedain isn't until 1975. So they got a good 340 years before they have to worry about that as far as the game is related. So Arthedain is still a thing, but the Shire is also a thing. And London and the Elves, the Dwarves, we got Círdan himself and his stats, Galador, Therer III, Thorin II, Erthodurthor, he's a great eagle. Towns and villages in Numeriador managed settlements. And some common in Numeriador's races are not surprisingly found in most of the region's settlements. Although these vary in size from 50 to 1,000 or more people, their structure remains very similar. All the towns possess a local thane appointed from the population of the village by the King of Arnor. The thane is technically treated as a minor nobility, though many Arthedain lords refuse to acknowledge this. So I want to go back to once again about my comment about Aragorn's ancestors and the Rangers of the North having their populations in this neck of the woods. This helps support my theory on that because, once again, it says right here in beta canon lore, right? That you've got many villages ranging between 50 and 1,000 people. 1,000 people is a respectable sized town, even in today's standards. So that you could have one or two odd thousand resident town in the backwater somewhere, supported by a handful of smaller villages. Look at Bree, for example. Bree uh, exists prior to Arthedain coming, during the wars of Angmar and Arthedain, and the centuries after that, and on into the Fourth Age. And if you have that kind of that kind of development in that scale in this region, in a couple locations, you have the grounds for the viable population to support the Rangers and their continued mission, and in the standards that the Dunedain would tolerate, because the Dunedain are high men. They have, I don't want to say, somewhat of a bias, but they have their own culture and their own means, and they need to be able to support that, or be supported to some level. Otherwise, they're not going to be subsistence dirt farmers surviving, eking out a living. At that point, they would leave. That's not in their nature to do that. They would continue to try to improve themselves, because that's where that knowledge and that drive and that extended lifespan come into play. Just my opinion. So at a couple different towns they got listed in here, villages, Dwarven Vale and some of their locations. The largest of the holds in the Blue Mountains, Telnag possesses a population of about 1,700 dwarves. The king of the Vale rules from a throne contained within its halls. And one of the things about the Blue Mountains is that collectively there's probably 10, 20,000 dwarves living in and out and surrounding the Blue Mountains and in the hills to the east of the mountains. And they're spread out in small enclaves, and the fairly larger holdfasts are going to be in the 1,000 or the 2,000 range. It says 1,700 is the max, the largest, but they would be spread out. As opposed, that's what makes places like the Lonely Mountain and back in the time when Moria was populated, such an impact. It was just a sheer amount of dwarves living in one location. If you go to the Iron Hills, it's never gone into depth, which I'm sad to say. I wish they had time to got to a series of supplements for that area, that region. They do have some that touch on it, but they don't go into the depth that they could. And I think that the Iron Hill settlements are the same way. They run around in sections and stuff. All right, hang on. All right, my friends, apologize for that slight blurb there. My sister came, and we had to put a pause on things. She came for a little short visit. So we'll finish this thing up, move on. So we're talking the Elvish Havens. It says within the bounds of Numeriador, there are two communities with principal populations: Elvish, a small hamlet of Galaros, or i.e. Green Spray, providing haven to no more than 41 individuals, and the great port city of Mythlod, the Grey Havens, numbering excess of 21,000 elves. Although their populations are radically different, both their ideals and structures are remarkably similar. The elves that live within Galaros consider themselves under the stewardship of Círdan and will answer to the administrative decisions of Mythlod. So we got the small village, we got the larger city, and it's implied that it's a big land, and the Grey Havens is on either side of the river or the bay, and that there's probably more villages and temporary sites, depending on whether they're nodals or Sylvan elves or whatever. Anyway, so we move on to the various adventures that are in the module, or the Legend of the Ice Caves, and the setting for that, the task. In a nutshell, some bandits have set up in this cave system, and there's a local dwarven hermit, really old fellow who's pretty popular with some of the townsfolk, and he gets terrified by these by some antics, some magical antics created by these bandits, who then decide to make a thing out of messing with the old man, the old dwarf, to the point he finally packs up and starts to leave. And the local bartender decides he wants to help and hires your group to go up there and figure out what's going on, and proceed from there, take care of the bandits. And then we move on to the next adventure, No Sense of Humor. Basically, in a nutshell, a couple of these trolls, and one fairly more sophisticated than your average troll starts leaving booby traps around as their idea of practical jokes that can be pretty lethal, and some people get hurt, some get killed, and locals decide to get somebody to go take care of the problem, and that's when the player group comes into play. And what they don't know is that they're facing trolls, and they have to go forward accordingly. And then that brings us with the Selgun barrows, the tail of the barrow mounds, and at the end of the day, a couple adventures and stuff like that. So we got other suggested adventures: a stolen sword, the eagle's nest, the mines of Belghost, and then we get the NPC tables and counter tables, beast tables, and stuff. Otherwise, this is a really nice adventure module and a really decent area, especially for beginning characters and lower levels to get players used to playing in the Middle Earth setting without being overly dominated by the book lore and stuff like that. But that's just my opinion on it. And this is Rick, and I hope you guys have a great weekend. Until next time.